Hello, thank you for doing this interview with us.
Yeah, no
Great to have
problem. I'm
you.
happy to be here.
Okay, so we go on to question one.
Okay.
What was your relationship with youth arts when you were a teenager?
So I kind of grew up in an area of Pennsylvania in the United States where it was like our arts basically was just our art class and that was it. And so my mom saw that I was an artistic kid, so she would always try and get me to just like she would put me in like summer camps that were for artists or to like focus on art. And then she even was the one who told me to go to college for art. She was like in influencing me to do that. So it was a lot of kind of like just my parent support and getting me into new programs and just figuring out what I like to do. She knew I liked to write, so she like kind of tried to get me into things like that. So yeah.
What do you enjoy about writing?
I just like coming up with new characters and just telling the stories that they fall into because I'm so there's when you're writing, there's either plotters or pantsers, and there are people who either plot or they kind of write by the seat of their pants. And I am a pantser because I like to come up with a character and usually I have like an idea of what the story is going to be, and then I have an ending in mind. And it's just filling in that middle part I find so exciting because sometimes there'll even be characters that were just like little one-offs that eventually grow into have their own storyline or kind of intersect. And it actually happened a couple times with All That's Left in the World. I had Henry was just supposed to be just a character they meet along the way, and then she became like a turning point for them as well. And Kara also was just supposed to be somebody that they met, and she just kind of I felt for her, and I was like, you know what, what's going on with her? Let's get her out of this place. And she eventually joined them and became part of the story as well. So I think that's the main thing that I love about writing is just kind of creating these worlds and seeing where these characters go and what they do, because I don't have anything planned. So
What was your inspiration for the novel?
so I was a little bit, there's not a lot of queer post-apocalyptic stories, and a lot of post-apocalyptic stories just focus on straight people, and it kept me wondering, like, what was that like? What happens to queer people after the apocalypse? Because we're already such a small portion of the population. So if a big part of the population is wiped out, what about us? And it just felt so lonely. So I wanted to kind of give this character a love story where he actually does find somebody. But then on the other side of that, I was like, okay, well, what if there was somebody who kind of didn't have the ability to explore his sexuality like when society was around, because he just didn't really think about it. It wasn't something he thought about because society was like, oh, this is what's normal and this is what you should kind of be doing. And so that's just how he was. And now that there is no society and he meets this new person, all of a sudden he's like, oh, wait, maybe there is something more. Maybe I can actually kind of explore things now. And so I just wanted to kind of merge the two of those things into this post-apocalyptic story.
Do you like to read? Like, would you have a favorite author?
Do I like to read?
Yeah.
Yeah, I read a lot. I mean, I'm a slow reader, but I always am constantly, as soon as I put down one book, I pick up another one. My favorite authors are, I like A.S. King in YA. I like Alex London. Let's see, Stephen King for adults. He was a big influence on me because I was reading him since third grade. I started with like R.L. Stine, like everybody does. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, wait, I can do more stuff. So I started reading Stephen King. And I actually got in, I think it was third or fourth grade, we had this part of class, but they called it Ribbit. It's reading is better every time. And we would just kind of like be able to read for about 40 minutes or so in class. And the kid next to me looked over my shoulder while I was reading a Stephen King book and raised his hand and told the teacher that there was an F word in it. And I got my book taken away from me. And then my mom thought I was like showing kids that, like, look, there's bad words in this. And I was like, no, I was just reading a book and enjoying my ribbit time. And so like I would always I always had that kind of actually spoiled things because I liked reading those books so much. And then all of a sudden I couldn't read it anymore. I think my mom realized that. So she's like, fine, you can have this new book by him. And pretty much once I was doing that again, I started just carrying his books around with me in middle school and high school. And then I also like Patrick Ness, because Patrick Ness was one of the first YA writers that I kind of picked up, The Knife of Never Letting Go. And I was reading it, and that was when I realized that young adult fiction had matured so much since I was a kid, where I wasn't reading it because I was like, oh, well, I can read Stephen King and I like those books. So I don't need these books that are just about kids doing just normal everyday things and things that I'm like, I don't want to read about. I want to read about all these exciting new adventures. And I want to read like these things that aren't just like kids butting heads about boys they like or whatever. And then all of a sudden I started reading these books that were dealing with more mature themes of like, okay, well, if they're butting heads about who they like, they're also figuring out the darkness of humanity and things like that, which I was just like, okay, this is different. I like this. I like this kind of genre blending that they're doing now. And it made me realize that young adult fiction had come a long way, and it was more diverse. It was telling stories that it hadn't been able to tell before. And I think that's why in America, at least, there are a lot of book bannings for young adult novels. It's basically books that are kind of holding a mirror up to society and being like, look, this is where we are going if we don't stop it right now. And kids are the way to do that. And I just think it made me so happy that young adult has changed so much.
So do you personally relate to any of the characters in your novel?
I relate a little bit to Jamie. Jamie he's very, he always wants to do like the, excuse me, he always wants to do the right thing. He always has this kind of moral idea in his head about what is right and what is wrong. And he's also very like anti-violence, which that's me as well. But I also relate to Andrew because I am sarcastic and I always like to make things jokes. So it's kind of they're a nice little kind of combination of me that I've just separated parts of my personality into.
What's your favorite part of All That's Left in the World?
My favorite part, I always love the scene in DC when they're walking through downtown Washington, D.C., and they start to realize that the zoo around the corner, somebody has let out all of the animals. That's always my favorite part, because that was one of the first scenes I kind of had fully formed in my mind when I wanted to write it, because I was also, I just kind of sat down and I was thinking about like what would happen in the apocalypse to all of these different things. And one of them was what would happen to animals who are like kind of relying on humans to take care of them. And what if there was like a zookeeper who just really felt bad, so when they were sick they just went into work one day and opened all the doors and let everybody out to hopefully they'll do something for themselves. And so I just kind of wanted to see what that scene looked like, and I really like that scene. It makes me, every time I read it I'm like, oh yeah, I like this. It came out exactly how I wanted it to.
Obviously, in the novel, there's a lot of kind of questions posed about like how society is after such a horrific event. Themes such as homophobia and white supremacy and all these other kind of serious topics. So how did you kind of incorporate kind of those into the novel?
So I think that was one of the biggest parts that came out of just editing it over time, where I saw the rise of authoritarianism and white supremacy in democratic societies, and I started getting more and more nervous, because it's like, if society does collapse, those people are still probably going to be a portion of survivors. So what happens if they regain control? What happens if they take this moment and go, oh, everybody's weak, let's organize, let's figure out how we can give comfort in this uncertain time, because that's always what it is. That's why they have excuse me, sorry, I don't know why I have a frog in my throat all of a sudden. Sorry about that. But that's why they kind of grab onto these moments when, especially now where everything's kind of up in the air, that people are concerned about inflation. And so they want to say, okay, well, if you help us get into a position of power, this is what we'll give to you. And it's usually comfort or safety. And I thought that doing that in a post-apocalyptic setting is even more obvious, that people who don't share those beliefs would absolutely join up because they're terrified, they're scared, they don't know what to do. And it was important to me to have Andrew and Jamie recognize that and still rebuke it, to basically say, oh, this does not represent who we are. No, we're choosing these danger and uncertainty that's on the road. We would rather be doing that than all of this.
Did you study anything at college?
I went to college for film and media arts. So I graduated in 2009, and I did try to go to LA I wanted to be a screenwriter. But it was the height of the recession, nobody was hiring. So I ended up becoming a banker after that. And that was pretty much when I started writing books, is because I worked in a bank where we were just a really, really slow branch, and there would be 3 hours at a time where not one customer would come in. So I was just sitting at my computer and I was like, well, I have a Word document, I can start writing books. So I started just kind of drafting these ideas down and figuring out like what I wanted to write and how, like what my voice was. And then I finally kind of got into novels because it's just, I didn't need all of the steps to get to publication that somebody would to get a film made. Because like with film, you have to write the script, and then you have to find the agent, and then you have to get the producer, and the producer has to get another producer, and the producers have to get a director, and then the directors have to get actors. And it's like, there's so many steps just to get a movie into production that a lot of movies just don't get made. There's probably like hundreds of thousands of scripts out there that aren't getting made. There's probably even more books, but at least with books, I could be like, all right, I have an editor, I have an agent. Now all I need is an editor, and then that's it. So
yeah. Central, obviously, circling back to All That's Left in the World. Also central to the book is themes such as like identity. Obviously Andrew is a bit more sure in his identity in the book. But Jamie kind of goes through this. I think it's a really nice journey of kind of self-discovery. So how did you incorporate that into the novel?
that was when I wanted Jamie to kind of have the freedom to explore sexuality, because he doesn't, like, normally I think people would, as soon as they kind of realize they may have a same-sex attraction, they'll kind of pause and go, okay, well, how do my friends think about me now? What would my family think? And there's a lot of, I think, especially bisexual people who just can't come out to friends and family because they are worried that something will change with them. They'll just either be cut off or they won't be friends with them anymore. And I think that a lot of bisexual people don't come out until they feel they finally need to, or at least until they feel safe enough to. And I guess that's probably everybody. It's not just bisexual people, but for Jamie specifically, I wanted to just kind of give him that time to think about it. And just at one point, he even says that he kind of wishes that his mom were still around because he feels like he could talk to her, which he had never realized before. And he does think that she would still support him, which I did like that. I was kind of like finding myself writing it, and I was like, she would absolutely. And I think Jamie knows that too. And I want him to kind of establish that here.
What would be your advice for young writers?
Um, my advice is always read a lot and write a lot, but also I've kind of been steering people towards to know when you don't have to write. Um, Everybody always says, "Oh, you have to write every day to become a writer," and that's not true because I'm not writing every day. In fact, if you do write every day, and if you want to be a writer, if you want that to be your all full-time job, like I do, writing every day does kind of lead to burning out, and you just don't feel like creative anymore. It causes all of these like internal struggles where you're like, oh my God, I'm a terrible writer. This was a one-off. I'll never be published again. So what I would instead say is read a lot, but write when you feel you are creatively fulfilled. Like as soon as you have inspiration and you are starting to get ideas, that's when you sit down and you write and take the time off that you need to kind of replenish, because being creative it's a well. So like you're constantly filling it up when you're reading, when you're playing video games, even when you're watching movies, TV. As long as you are doing something that you're enjoying and you are taking in new art, that will provide inspiration and creativity for you to continue to do whatever. So just figure out what is working for you. That's what I would say.
In all that's left in the world, obviously, I think there's kind of a conscious, kind of hopeful message. So kind of how do you feel about the message, the more hopeful tone of the story in comparison to kind of what you could have gone down kind of very dark and gritty?
So that was one of the things I wanted to really focus on with the book was it just seems like all post-apocalyptic stuff is always so upsetting. Like The Road by Cormac McCarthy is very, very, very dark. The Walking Dead, the show, it just seems like it's getting to this moment of, oh, well, maybe things will work out this time. And then some crazy person comes in and destroys it all, and zombies come and eat everybody. And I didn't want that constant kind of despair. I wanted a little bit of happiness. So especially with Andrew, where I think it kind of helps out that humor is his coping mechanism. So he is able to make other people laugh, and that after a while they kind of are like, okay, I understand what you're doing, and this actually it is nice to have you here, and we can both laugh together, even though everyone we know is dead and the world is falling apart. And especially I wanted them to have a hopeful ending, because especially as queer characters used to like not get happy endings. We would always be the first to die, or we wouldn't be able to have a relationship where both people are happy that at least one of them has to die. And I wanted to kind of tease that it could happen and just torture readers for a little bit, but I still wanted them to have a hopeful ending regardless of what happened to them. And especially over the couple of years that I was editing it, like things just kind of kept getting a little more dark, and every time it got dark again, I would kind of revisit the book and add more to it to expose that darkness, but also still be like, look, there is hope there. As long as there is love in the world, you actually can be happy, you can have hope, and there is going to be something good happening. So that was mainly what I was trying to go with this book.
What inspired the title of All That's Left in the World?
I had no title for it, and I started writing my query letter to get my agent, and I wrote the sentence, trying to remember what it was. It was basically, it's like, something like, what can they do when, or how are they going to survive when all that's left in the world is the love they have for each other? And as soon as I wrote that sentence down, I went, oh, ooh, that's the title, isn't it? So that's when I finally got a title. It was basically just called Andrew for the longest time, because when you write a Word document, it just basically saves the first sentence or word that you write. So I started the chapter with Andrew because it was his point of view. And so it was just called Andrew for the longest time, I think like 4 years.
Obviously with Andrew and Jamie as well, the book is very funny in places, especially like through its use of kind of inner thoughts and kind of dialogue. So how did you kind of develop the kind of writing style of the book?
So that came about, I had or I think Andrew came a little bit easier to me. When I got my agent, he said that the only editing we had to do before we went and sent it to editors was we had to differentiate their voices a little bit more since it's a dual POV story. And he said that Andrew just kind of came through a lot clearer. And I think the reason he did is because I break a lot of rules with writing his point of view, because a lot of times he's kind of breaking the fourth wall. He'll talk to the reader, but not in a way that's jarring, because it's kind of, you can tell it's in his head. He's talking to himself, but it kind of reads as he's talking to the reader. And he'll also do like self-referential humor throughout the book, where he'll like say something on page 35 and then reference it again on page like 250. And I think that's where the main kind of voice of the story came from, which was just being able to kind of throw the rules out the window for him and be like, all right, this is just how he tells stories in his head. And with Jamie, I managed to kind of, I guess, ground his voice a little bit more. He's more analytical. He does a lot more thinking in his mind, where Andrew sometimes says the things that he's thinking out loud. And I also kind of helped change their voices based on, I was editing Andrew's point of view from my office here, where I am right now. And then I also do real estate on the side. So I would write Jamie's story, like chapters. I'd edit all of Jamie's chapters at my real estate office while I was taking phone calls and everything, just to kind of change up my location, because that area is more structured, so it fit Jamie's voice more. And then here, this is my office. I just kind of come here and do whatever. So it's like, this is more me and this is more my kind of voice. So I think that's pretty much how I got the writing down, how it came out.
In a world post-COVID, do you think it was important to have the message be hopeful in all that's left in the world instead of depressing and bleak?
Yes, absolutely. I wanted that more than anything. This was written before COVID, but it was sold on March 13th of 2020. And so that was even part of adding COVID to the story. I just kind of added in passing, where it was like COVID happened a little bit ago in this story, and then all of a sudden the super flu came along. And I wanted to kind of still bring up the fact that we didn't do very well with we didn't take care of people, and when COVID hit. And I think that was the big issue. A lot of people, especially in America's very individualistic, and we just we care more about what you are doing to my rights, not we're saving people by also maybe giving up some of our rights for just a little bit of time, like wearing a mask for a little bit. And it was important for me to kind of bring in the real world things, but not have it be like, oh, look, if the real world is terrible all the time and we are all going to die because of this, I still wanted it to be hopeful. I wanted there to be like a little bit of a message where it's like, if you aren't just focusing on yourself, if you're not being selfish, there could actually be some good in the world, and we may actually be able to come out of this okay.
What was your emotional mindset the day that all that's left in oh my god, I'm sorry, all that's left in the world was released?
The day it came out?
Yeah.
Oh, I was a nervous mess.
Yeah.
I honestly, the response has been amazing. I really did not expect it. When it sold in 2020, I was like, oh, okay, well, this will probably be over by like October, all the COVID stuff. It'll be over by October. And then maybe people will be like, oh, I could totally read a pandemic book. But then releasing in 2022, when we still were in a pandemic, And I was just like, nobody's going to want to read this. Nobody wants to read this at all. Why would they? And I don't blame them. And then I felt guilty, like telling people to buy it. I was just a nervous mess. So I went to Spain. I just released the book, and the next week I was like, you know what, I'm going on vacation. So my partner and I, we went to Spain, and it was wonderful. I actually did, there's a bookstore in New York that wanted me to do a virtual event because they hadn't done in-person events yet. And they emailed me the week before I was supposed to go to Spain saying, hey, do you want to come in for this? Or do you want to log on to do this virtual event? And in my mind, I was like, what's the time difference? I was like, ooh, that'll be like 1 a.m. in Spain time. And I was like, you know what? Sure, why not? I'm on vacation. So I took it from my hotel room after like having a little glass of cava. It was wonderful. I loved it. So I suggest, if there are any writers out there, when you're about to release a book a vacation, because then you won't even think about it. You'll just be enjoying your life, and you won't think about your sales or if anybody's reading the book. It's wonderful. But then you come back and realize that you've been gone for a week and want to check your sales and everything. So it doesn't work for that long.
And maybe for just to finish things up, do you think that all that's left in the world, even though it is set kind of in a very kind of different universe, and do you think it's relatable for teenagers today?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that it's relatable because we all kind of feel emotions like this. We feel these either connections to people or the love for people, whether or not it's friendship or love. I think we all the main experience in all that's left in the world is just finding love in these dark places. And I think that is kind of universal for everybody. I think anybody can kind of relate to that.
But thank you so much for agreeing to do the interview with us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's great.